Now, hi, this is Tara Goldstein, the Vice Principal of New College. We are here to do a session on going to graduate school. I am joined by our senior doctoral fellows, and I'm so happy that they are here to join us today to work with the New College undergrads who are thinking about going to grad school. The agenda is on the chat. You can see that we are going to work in 3 themes: choosing a graduate school applications, and tips for applying to graduate school. We are going to work with the stories that our senior doctoral fellows, folks who are now doing their PhDs, have to share with us about their own experience. Kyle doesn't see anything in the chat. Let me try again, Kyle. Thanks for letting me know. How about now? Can you see it? Can folks give me a thanks? Good, Kyle. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, let me see. Hannah is here. Hello, Hannah. Welcome. And we do have Yi Quinn here, so that's great. We have 2 of our senior doctoral fellows here. We're so happy to have you here. We'll give people just another minute and then we will begin. Ryan's here too. Thanks, Ryan. I don't always see everybody on the list. So we have 3 senior doctoral fellows here with us. Thanks so much for being here. We're going to start with introductions of our senior doctoral fellows, and for you to say hello to everybody, and then we'll get with our agenda, which is divided into 3 themes. And the first theme is choosing a graduate school. The second one is applying and the experience of applying to graduate school. The next one is applications. And the last one is tips. All right. I think we'll begin. So let's begin. Ryan, would you like to say hi to everybody? And would you just tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. It's nice to see everyone. My name is Ryan Prasadi. I'm this year's senior doctoral fellow in Caribbean Studies, but my PhD is in the Women and Gender Studies Institute, and I'm doing a collaborative specialization also in sexual diversity studies. I'm working with Dr. Elisa Trotz and Dr. Cassandra Lord in the Women and Gender Studies Institute. And I guess maybe since this is about grad school, my research particularly focuses on transnational Caribbean feminist politics, Caribbean sexualities, and queer studies. And so I particularly I come from a music background actually, so my training was not in women and gender studies, and all my degrees were in different disciplines. It didn't just kind of happen that way. But I particularly do work using sound, dance, and the body to think about sort of transnational crossings of memory and violence and history by turning to this one geography that I'm calling in my research the queer fete. So the word fete is a French word for party, but particularly in the context of Caribbean histories, and particularly in a space like Toronto, where we have a long-standing tradition of carnival and Caribbean diasporic migration. I think about the ways in which these sort of these fete spaces offer queer and trans community a lot of ways to rethink sort of mainstream imaginings of home and belonging and sexual citizenship, and particularly also the ways in which pain, what I'm really doing now is looking at the crossings of sort of pain and pleasure, and sort of how pain and pleasure are sort of relational emotions and affects and histories that help us to think through sort of contemporary queer diasporic formations in the 21st century. So super happy to be here.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I see Hazel has joined us as well. We are beginning by having each of our senior doctoral fellows introduce themselves, and then we're going to move on to the first theme. And Yi Quinn, would you like to go next?
Hi. Oh, sure. Yeah. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Liu Yiqing, and people call me Liu. And So yes, I'm a proud member of the new college and also the human biology program and association with this program. And so yes, I'm a senior year PhD student in my year number 7 at Mount Sinai Hospitals and also at the Department of Medical Genetics. And yes, so people have seen me probably in this department for in the college for the past 5-6 years in my role as both a lecturer and also in many of the outreach events. So I'm originally from Beijing, China, and I consider myself very Canadian as well, and because I did all my studies across in Montreal and I guess in everyone's rival school in Montreal, and studied about biochemistries and also functional genetics. And right now I'm doing my PhD thesis on functional genetics and proteomics, and with a particular focus on PP3 tumor suppressor proteins. And it is very so I have applied for grad schools, many schools in the States and also in Europe and also in Canada, and eventually decided to come to Toronto to do my grad studies. So really looking forward to sharing my experience also and to also some sharing tips and addressing any potential questions and people may have. Just feel free to shout out and we'll be happy to address them. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So you can already see, and we still have some more senior doctoral fellows to introduce you to. We have people with experience in lots of different fields, in lots of different areas of study, and that kind of vast experience is going to be wonderful. Thanks to Lou. Okay, Hannah, would you like to go next? Say hi to everybody.
Sure. Hi, thanks for having us, Tara, and nice to see you all here. I'll just warn you that I'm sitting at my table feeding my 1-year-old some early dinner. So if you hear some squawking in the background, that's what that is. She's also excited to be here. So yeah, I'll have her wave if she starts making noise. So yeah, my name is Hannah Quinn, and I'm a 5th-year doctoral candidate in the Department of Anthropology and the Collaborative Specialization in Sexual Diversity Studies at U of T. I'm from Montreal and I'm currently based in Montreal, so I'm zooming to you from there. What might be relevant for today is the fact that I did my undergrad at McGill in anthropology and international development studies. I did my master's in anthropology at UBC in Vancouver, and now I'm doing my PhD at U of T. So I've made the rounds, but I'll also note that I didn't move for my degrees. I had already moved to some of these other places before applying. So just sort of, if you're thinking about what comes next for you, that's a little bit of my application and story of movement across the country for my graduate studies. I'm one of the senior doctoral fellows for critical studies in equity and solidarity at New College. My research is focused around working with adults labeled as intellectually disabled at a day center here in Montreal. I'm looking at issues about capacity to consent, sex ed, intimacy, sexuality, and currently working on a chapter about friendship and how friendship is a very depoliticized idea, right? It's taken as an inherently good thing to have friends, but I'm looking at how disability services in Montreal and Quebec are sort of administered through this idea of friendship and how it can actually be a very coercive dynamic and sometimes highly surveyed as well. So that's sort of a very simple understanding of what I'm working on right now as I'm writing. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what kind of info you're looking for and how my experience might be useful to some of you. So thanks for having us.
Wonderful. I think you're all doing a superb job of doing what we call the elevator pitch, explaining your very complicated work in a very short amount of time. Bravo. And our 4th senior doctoral fellow is Hazel. Hazel is also a senior doctoral fellow, soon to be a postdoc, with critical studies in equity and solidarity. Hazel, would you like to say hi to everybody?
Hey, yes, thank you, Tara. It's actually, my name is actually Hazal, so it's not
Hazal,
Hazel.
thank you,
Yes,
Hazal.
with double A's. So thank you for the introduction. I'm a fifth year PhD candidate at Women and Gender Studies department, and I'm an international student at the University of Toronto. So my experience is probably a little different because doing graduate work with a study permit as an international student brings all kinds of different experiences. For example, I am not currently in Toronto. That's also the reason for that is also due to my study permit, because I have to extend my study permit by leaving the country, which I did in summer. I extended my study permit until 2024, but I'm still waiting for my visa to be approved. So I have to wait in my home country in Turkey to be able to enter the country again. So including these, entries and out, the kind of sometimes due to COVID in the previous years, and sometimes for other reasons, there's always a risk of being kicked out of the country. And there are like scholarships. Scholarship details are different, criteria are different for international students. I mean, for each country, of course, these criteria are different, but being an international graduate student, I think, is a whole package of its own. So maybe we can also discuss about that if any of you is considering an international experience. But my work now, if I come to my work is about the question of what remains after collective loss, when loss is historically erased, politically denied, and collectively repressed. After genocides, after collective violent events, after colonial erasure. So I'm excavating the traces of the Armenian genocide, which happened at the Ottoman Empire in 1915. By excavating the traces of the genocide at the intersection of history, memory, and literature, I'm investigating how unreconciled histories of racial and colonial violence slip into the present, through affect and shape national identities and imaginaries, as well as collective imaginaries. So these are the topics that I'm interested in. I'm using post-colonial theory, psychoanalysis, more theories of affect, and I'm working in the archives, but I'm also taking the concept of archive as a very broad concept. I'm looking at literature, literary text. I'm looking at the landscapes. I'm looking at how the landscapes are depicted to look for the ghosts of the repressed memories of genocide. So yeah, these are the topics that I'm interested in, and I can talk about more about these in a bit.
Beautiful, Hazal. Thank you so much. I see we have Hazal, what time is it there in Turkey? You made a big effort to join us very late in the evening, I think.
It's 10:15 p.m. now. It's not very late because I'm actually teaching my class on post-colonialism at 1 a.m. on Mondays right now.
Oh, okay.
Until I enter the country again. Yeah. So 10 p.m. is okay for me right now.
Well, we appreciate that so much. And I think Binta is here, and Binta has joined us. Binta, do you want to unmute and say hi to everybody? We have 42 people here, and we're just beginning, for the folks who have just joined us, introducing our senior doctoral fellows who are going to make up the panel for today's session. I'll put the agenda in the chat one more time. Binta, the floor is yours.
Hi, Tara. Hi, everybody. I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm also just like Hazel. I'm not in Canada. So I am like, it's 9 p.m. here, 9:16.
Wow.
But unlike Hazel, who's a trooper, I tend to go to bed early. I wake up super early to actually do my research. So pleasure to be here. Apologies for coming in late. But my research is basically on the impacts of climate change in the Sahel, focusing on Senegal and Gambia, where I reimagine it as one region, looking at it through an intersectional feminist, Afro-feminist lens. I should be very specific. An intersectional Afro-feminist lens, looking at the impacts of climate change, the vulnerabilities of it, but also the indigenous resilience that communities have already. So if we do tell their stories through their songs, poetry, oral history, I'm actually in the field right now doing the field work. So more than happy to chat about that with
Thank
everybody.
you. And thank you for being a night owl for our session. That's so great. We're going to go to the first theme, choosing a graduate school. Maybe you can also talk, panel, a little bit about why you decided to go to graduate school. Of course, when you finish your undergrad, it's always a possibility, but not everybody chooses graduate school. Some people do something else completely. Some people take a few years and do some interesting things and then go to graduate school. So I think we'll start with a few people, maybe 2 or 3 of our panel, to tell us a little bit about why they wanted to go to graduate school and how did they choose the graduate school they went to. And Ryan, would you start us off?
Sure. And feel free to cut me off if I'm talking too much, because I know we do have a time limit.
We do.
Yes. I'll say, actually, I kind of, as I said, all of my degrees were in different disciplines. And that's because I was sort of looking in every sort of discipline. I got really strong training, but obviously felt my work was very intersectional and my work was very transnational. And so I actually started I did my undergrad in music education at Western, thinking that I was going to become a high school music teacher. And I soon learned about the sort of very neo-colonial nature of the education system in Ontario and Canada more largely. And what really sort of detracted me from staying in the education system was the sort of overcoming the surveillance and policing that was happening, particularly through trying to doing radical feminist pedagogy in the high school space where I was teaching. And so I really came to grad school out of one, frustration of not being able to do the work with communities that I wanted to do. And number 2, wanting to sort of build this sort of ongoing feminist learning that I wanted to do. And so I ended up doing a master's degree at U of T as well in ethnomusicology, which for anyone who doesn't know is sort of a subfield of musicology that's sort of like the anthropology of music and sound. And there I got to sort of build my sort of critical training in sound studies and music, in sort of gender and sexuality to a degree. And I actually found who became my graduate supervisors by taking a course in queer of color critique while I was a graduate student in the master's department, because that was sort of one of the misses that the ethnomusicology department couldn't offer me, was there weren't a lot of people sort of doing transnational sexualities or sort of queer theory and that sort of thing. And so I ended up taking a course with Cassandra Lord, who then became one of my supervisors for my graduate project. And sort of, I just sort of kind of landed in women and gender studies out of a desire to sort of build sort of on my ongoing work with music by working through the transnational feminist project. And so I saw my work as being less concerned with sort of music studies, but actually music became my archive. But sort of the training that I was doing was largely grounded in through the transnational feminist mobilizations. And sort of, that's sort of how I landed here. And I really only, I mean, I don't recommend doing this, but I only applied to one graduate program because I really wanted to work with the people I wanted to work with. And because my work was on queer Caribbean diaspora, this city is a very sort of Caribbean city in terms of the community organizing and sort of the feminist sort of legacies that have been attached to Toronto. And so it made perfect sense to work with Elisa Trotz and Cassandra Lord and sort of get the sort of rigorous training and, you know, and Black feminist thought and queer diasporic thought and sort of all the sort of focuses that, you know, Hazal is also in my program, so I'm sure they can also speak back to the sort of focus. But the transnational became really, really central to the work that I wanted to do, which was obviously, not that it was missing for the departments, but because it was a focus here, obviously the sort of people and courses and, you know, cohorts that were able to come into conversation that brought different sort of histories and migrations and disciplines together within women and gender studies made the most sense for me. And actually, I'm so thankful that I was here because I was able to really sort of move beyond sort of just music, but bringing music into conversation with sort of feminist politics and diaspora and Black studies, et cetera, Black feminisms. And so it was the really critical sort of training that I needed to get to where I am today. And I don't think I would have been able to get to the project I am now and the level of thinking I am now if I had just stayed in one field. And so I'm really sort of honoring all the disciplines that have sort of trained me to produce the work that I do today.
Brilliant. So before I ask somebody else to do exactly what Ryan just did, I want to highlight a few really important features. One, you have a choice of focusing on a particular area of study and continuing to build in that particular area. And there may be doctoral fellows who have done just that. Or you can come to graduate school leaving one particular area that you studied that you enjoyed, but as Ryan said, you began to see the limits of, and go somewhere else and build a graduate degree that way. Ryan said something really important. He was accepted into one graduate program in anthropology, but not all programs can do all things for you. And Ryan was able to identify something specific that he was missing. He found a course in another program to enhance what he was learning. And that exploration allowed him to meet a prof who ended up being very important, one of his supervisors, and then that in itself gave him some further direction about where the PhD should be. So I think what I've learned from Ryan's sharing of his experience is that you can't always predict where you're going to go right from the very beginning. Your graduate school journey needs to be undertaken with a place to begin, but with an openness to continue to grow. And in Ryan's case, he doesn't actually suggest you do that, because what happens if the one graduate school you apply to doesn't accept you? But because by the time he knew what he wanted to do for his PhD, he was so sure of who he wanted to work with and who those people were, that he felt safe in doing just that. And Ryan, maybe later on we'll ask you the kind of work you did to, before you applied, to help you get the attention of your two supervisors. I'm assuming you spoke to both of them before you applied. One was your instructor, but one was not. Okay, Hazal, would you like to go next and tell us a little bit about your journey? Just before you do that, Welna asks, will there be a posting of the recording? Yes, it will be on the New College website, and we'll give you some notice about when that's up. Okay, Hazal, it's up to you.
Okay, my academic journey is a little bit complicated. So my personal trajectory might not be like directly helpful to you, but I'm sure there are elements in it, like it's okay to change fields, for example, or it's okay to change countries. It's okay to change topics. First of all, I have a various humanities departments in my background. I did my BA in social anthropology, and I have 2 MAs from comparative literature and sociology, all in Turkey. And once a second. Sorry.
That's okay.
About that. Maybe the complicated part is that I was in another PhD program in Turkey, and I did 5 years of PhD in my first PhD in Turkey. But because of the political turmoil, and because there was no more, because me pursuing my PhD project in Turkey was no more possible because of the political climate in Turkey, I had to quit that PhD program. So these things happen. Maybe less in Canada, but you might need to, change your trajectory, change your path for many reasons, and it's okay. At first, it might be difficult, but for me, I also applied for one PhD program in Canada, Gender Studies Department. And the only reason for that, to be honest, was my supervisors, Shahrzad Moja from OISI and Dina Georges from WGSI. And I knew that those professors would be interested in my topic and would be also supportive with my project and would be also understanding the context that I'm coming from, both politically and personally. So those were really important factors for me to decide to apply for a program. And at that stage, of course, because it's my second PhD, I already knew what I needed, what I wanted to do in terms of my topic. But maybe if I may speak to the variety of disciplines I did, yes, I'm kind of a person who just follows my curiosity. I didn't really build my career according to, I have to do this or do this. I got curious about one topic and I found the best program and best discipline for that topic. And then I got curious about another topic. So that has been my trajectory. You'll probably hear a lot of things and a lot of people saying that there's only one way to do things. I just maybe can remind, all of us here that no, there's not only one way. There are many ways, and I'm sure you'll find your own way, which feels good for you at one point.
Thank you so much. So first, I want to congratulate you on your perseverance. There are many people who would not have started again and tried again somewhere else. You have an attitude of positivism and a positive vibe, and this whole idea of your path may be uncertain, your path may need to change, but you can make something wonderful happen when you are asked to change, forced to change. Very inspiring. Thank you so, so much. Hannah, would you like to talk a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So when I finished my undergrad, I moved, I think the same summer, to Vancouver for a job that I had secured right out of my undergrad. I should also just add that I worked throughout my undergraduate degree, so it took me a little longer. In Quebec, university is technically, your undergrad is technically 3 years if you do it, at the standard pace, but I took a bit longer because I was working. I come from a working class family, and no one in my family had pursued higher education, probably like others in the room. And so I really had no sense of what it entailed, what I needed to, what the hidden curriculum is. That's what we call it, right? Of sort of the ins and outs of doing grad school. So I was working in Vancouver, didn't have a lot of money, didn't, the job was fine, but I started thinking about maybe wanting to pursue graduate studies because it seemed like a more interesting alternative to the sort of regular job that I was working, if that makes sense. And it also, it felt at the time, and I think maybe others would feel this way, it felt like a stable thing to do. It seemed like a good opportunity in terms of having stability in the long run. We can talk now whether or not that's the case now that I'm at, near the end of my PhD. But so what I did was I was already in Vancouver, and at that point I'd already, spent the money to move there and sort of get settled, and spent 2 years working, put some money aside knowing that this was the plan. And I just sort of started looking at the universities that were there, right? Because to me, there's an element of convenience and practicality to a lot of my grad school experience that I think is important. Being really realistic about my finances and what I could handle. So I looked at the UBC anthropology department because I'd come out of anthropology and I knew it was a great school. I looked at some of the faculty and what their interests were, what sort of aligned with things I was interested in. And I had this sort of pet project on my mind, right? When you're in undergrad, you sort of know what kinds of courses you're most interested in. Maybe you wrote a thesis paper or had a sort of higher level course where you had a research paper that you really felt interested in or inspired by. So I had those things. And I found some faculty in that department who sort of aligned with some of those ideas. And I reached out and got some support applying for a SHIRK, a master's SHIRK. So that's one piece of advice I'd give is like really think about what your sort of financial situation is, because some master's degrees have funding, some do not. Some give you funding for the first year, but if it's a 2-year master's, they may not offer it for the second. So to be very like realistic, if this is your situation, I think it's important to consider those questions. I mean, at least it was in my case. And when I applied to so I only applied to the one for my master's, again, because I was right there. And I found faculty whose work was inspiring and who I felt like I could work with. When it came to the PhD, I sort of did a similar thing. I looked for a balance of a faculty member who was doing the work that I wanted to do and who I knew I would be able to be compatible with after, conversations and reading their work and really getting to know the department through, whatever I could find, asking grad students who are already there. And again, like, where was the funding where I knew I'd be able to survive, right? Being able to pay my bills. So I applied only to U of T after I applied to U of T and McGill. And the offer I got from U of T was like really solid. And I knew I'd be able to like comfortably do some work there for a few years. So I hate to like emphasize that. I think it's because we're all going to emphasize different things probably as we go through every example, but I just think it's important to mention that aspect that, these are important things to think about. Where is like a livable city? Where can you find housing? All these questions, I think right now, especially, are a really big deal. So I'm just highlighting that. There's other things I could say, but I think that's what I'll highlight right now.
Thank you, Hannah. I love the way that you have layered the other two journeys. And this is why having a panel of senior doctoral fellows is such a great way to do these workshops. In your case, you found yourself in Vancouver. You knew that you wanted to stay in that particular city. So you did your research. You looked at the universities there. Because you had a sense of the kinds of things you were interested in from undergrad, that was a great tip. Think about the projects, the papers you really loved. You looked for people who might be a good match. You talked to them a bit about your work, and you got their support before or at the same time as you applied, so that you could also focus on the financial funding that you would need. And I was just putting into the chat, because Hannah's area is in the social science and humanities, she went for a SHIRK grant, but you do need a supervisor's support for that. So often people start a master's degree and they do a first year, they have their supervisor get to know them, and then they apply for a master's. But folks who are really organized the way that Hannah did, you managed to start early enough so that you could secure a potential supervisor and secure their support. And by the time you were ready to start your master's in September, the SHIRK was already there. So congratulations on that. I think what you had to share with us about thinking about funding and finances and where you think you can make a go of it is a really important layer to it all. So thanks so much. Lou, would you like to go next and tell us a little bit about your journey?
Oh, for sure. Thank you. So yes, I'm from the science field. I'm in the biology program, genetics program. So I guess we're luckier that if you do grad schools, you are guaranteed a base foundings. And if you have scholarships, obviously it's even better. You've got a top up. So that's the funding situations for science grad students. And so for me, why I went to grad school is after graduating from undergrad, and it is a very common route for science grad students to do a grad degree if you are into research or you want to learn advanced methodology in the field. And while undergrad teach the informations and the grad school is more about methodology study and how you become research into the field. So I love research, and as such, I chose to do grad schools. So in terms of what grad schools I chose, I did my undergrad also at McGill in biochem, and I continued my grad work in the exact same laboratories where I performed one of my undergrad research project. So I continued to get my master's degree. And after that, I became a university teacher in Alberta, and I taught for 4 years. And it is until that time, there was the booming field of the post-genetics era with all the genetics research. I started to decided to actually finish my PhD studies in the genetics. And so when I decided to where to do my grad studies, so I applied for based on the papers I read and also interesting seminars that I have been to, and was the most important. I picked a very few important labs that I'm really interested in, and also including the folks that I met in the conference. And so that make up the most of the people that I decide to apply for. So in terms of what schools and eventually that I decided to choose, I applied for Harvard, and in Europe, I applied for EMBO, and also I believe I applied for MIT and Berkeley in the States, and in Canada, it's Toronto, McGill, and UBC. Those are the programs I went to. The reason I chose those programs is that first, I want to find a really hot project and really hot researcher that I'm into, but also it's important to pick a program that I'm interested in that can offer the support. And nowadays, research cannot be done just by ourselves, but more in a collaborative efforts. And so all this big academic centers apply for offers this opportunity to collaborate. And eventually I landed in Toronto, and for the reason that I really love my supervisor, who I happened to meet in a seminar, and also that there is no regret. Toronto's biomedical science research is so fascinating. It's a hub, and there's a ton of research collaboration opportunity. With that said,
Thank you so much, Lou. So in contrast to folks who only did one grad school application because they knew exactly who and what they wanted to study, Lou did many more applications internationally all over the world, and you thought big for yourself, Lou. You applied to elite schools, and you had both a lot of research experience in research labs at McGill, and you also had a lot of teaching. These experiences, I think, gave you a confidence and a set of experiences that made you very, very eligible. And what I love is that you went to conferences, you got out there, you found out who was doing what, and in the end, you chose a school because you thought the supervisor and you were a great match. And that school, U of T, happened to have a range of people, a range of teams, a range of labs in a field that you were interested in, biomedical research. So you felt like you were coming to a community, not just a small space.
I also want to mention that the way you start communicating with a lot of the programs, actually you apply directly to the program, but nothing prevents you from reaching out to the supervisor directly to lock in first. And this will also help in terms of like after rotations, you can pick this supervisor. And I also want to mention the way you interact with the supervisor, how fast they respond to you. Also, I guess it's a predictive value as to in the next few years, how the supervisor will interact with you as well. And lastly, I want to second Hannah and Ryan's comments just now that if we apply for fundings in advance and also derive a project in advance, it shows both, and as such we can apply for fundings. This shows up not only your commitment, but also shows how well you can work with the supervisor already. So that's my 2 cents.
Lovely. And we have Binta, who's going to finish up session 1, theme 1, with her story. Binta, it's the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to hear everybody's story. I just like Ryan, I actually, unlike Ryan, I did not have a a straight path towards grad school. I did not think I will actually be pursuing my PhD. I'm from the Gambia. Originally, I came to Canada when I was 15 for school. So the expectation was, of course, you leave the country, go elsewhere, typically in the Western world, to pursue your education. I always knew that I wanted to work for the United Nations somehow. So I went to Western, did my undergrad in history and global studies, moved to Toronto, worked 4 years in order to save up money because I knew I wanted to go to a particular school. It was very expensive because I was an international student. So I was paying like $15,000-$20,000 a year. Well, my mother was, and I had to work to afford paying rent. So when I moved to Toronto, I knew that I wanted to go pursue my master's at the London School of Economics. So that was my determination. If you have that level of thinking and a level of focus, do that. But I did that because in Canada, I was an international student. In London, I'll be an international student. So I wanted to save up 4 years to know that this is a school that I wanted to get to. Went to LSE, got in, and then I had no intention whatsoever to ever go back to school because I was like, I need to make money and actually start working in international organizations that I wanted. The reason why I pursued my PhD is because of representation. Throughout my time in Canada, both at Western and my time at London School of Economics, I've never been taught by a Black person. I've been taught by people of color, but never by an African, nor African American or Canadian. I'm like, none. So I moved back to Toronto and I met somebody who's going to be my future supervisor. And I was convinced that if I was to ever pursue education again, the least I could do is to pursue an education with somebody with an Afrofeminist lens. And I was lucky to find that. So I applied to University of Toronto after I've been working for the United Nations for 3-4 years. So because of the opportunity of finally meeting someone who I believed within the WGSI, which is Women and Gender Studies at University of Toronto, I could have the intellectual spark that I needed that was worth it for me to come back to school. So I came back as kind of like a mature PhD student at like 29 years old. I quit my career within the United Nations to come back because I knew that will build me up theoretically and also help me with my current work within the humanitarian space. So if you are, my advice is I've been through school in Gambia, Canada, England, and back to Canada. Representation really matters, and it's really important to have the supervisors that will see you and understand you. And then you will be able to encourage you to have that intellectual spark that you need to write anything or research anything that you think your voice is important as well. So, and I didn't jump from undergrad to master's to PhD. I took 4 years in between. And I think that enriched my experience and maybe helped me compete because you had amazing people like Hazel and Ryan and all that in WGSI. So in order to compete with these intelligent people, you have to bring something more than just running through universities. I tell my younger siblings that like find a job, find experiences that will make you unique in a way. And the world is large. The world is there's so many interesting things, and I think it's important to have an enriched experience. And in that way, you will be competitive. Like I went to really good schools, and I was competitive because I felt because I had experiences that I could bring into the school, and that was probably, and with good grades, of course, and a focus, that really helps out. So without adding too much, I think that's another perspective that people should not rush through, and go pursue your dreams and your goals. And always, if you want to come back, that will enrich your experience. It will not take away from it.
Beautiful. And somebody else with thinking big and going out and getting into the school that you really wanted to get into and not rushing through working and then coming back. And what we learned from Binta's talk is that, you know, you don't always know exactly what you need until you're out working. And Binta realized that they really wanted this Afro-feminist lens, and then they found exactly the right person to work with. Fantastic. We are going to take a few minutes to see if any of our participants have any questions. You can put a question in the chat, or you can unmute, raise your hand and say, I'd like to ask a question, and tell us who you are. And we'll take a few questions for about 5, 7, maybe 10 minutes. We'll see how it goes. Any questions about what you've heard so far? We've had some fascinating stories about people's journeys. What do you think? What do you want to ask? Don't be shy. Everything is interesting. Okay, here's something from Kyle's. Here are a few questions from Kyle. Let's see if our panel can answer them. What advice do you have for someone who's interested in a variety of subjects? Is there an opportunity to fill out what you want to focus on during graduate school, or do you need to have a clearer idea of what to focus on? Kyle wants to go to graduate school for experimental psychology. How much value do graduate schools place on experience from a previous career? What advice do you have for developing relationships with professors? Okay, Kyle, some of what you have asked has already been discussed, so I'm going to help focus all of your great questions into one or two. A number of people have already talked about their variety of interests, and most of our folks have had a very good idea of what they wanted to do before they applied. It was that clear sense of what they wanted to do and how they wanted to fund their graduate school that actually made them competitive. So I'm going to go straight to your question about experience from a previous career, and how do you build relationships with professors that could lead to letters of recommendation, and how do you create relationships with potential supervisors? And I think that Binta talked a lot about the importance of work, and whether that's part-time work during undergrad or taking some time off. Yes, it is important. So let's focus on developing relationships with profs. Undergrad profs, so you can get strong letters of recommendation, and reaching out to potential supervisors before you even know them. I think all of those questions are great. Go ahead, Hannah.
I totally hear that you want to move to that question. I just wanted to emphasize, though, this emphasis that we put on having a clear project when you apply. I think it's extremely important to also mention that I, for example, entered my MA with a very sort of well laid out plan for what my topic would be, my methods, the themes, the potential theoretical engagements, and it almost entirely changed by the time I wrote my master's thesis 2 years later. So I think it's important to know that for the sake of the application, it's very good and important to have a strong sense of what you're interested in, to work with that supervisor, but also, as others have mentioned, things change and projects change. And there's definitely room to feel things out once you're in a program. So that's just the first thing I wanted to say. To the point about letters of recommendation from potential undergrad professors, I think a really good thing to do is think about the courses you've really enjoyed. Think about the courses where you particularly appreciated even things like perhaps how the professor taught the course, assignments that really resonated with you, content that really excited you. Because these relationships can start off like, hey, we were on Zoom last year together, but your course has stayed with me. I'm wondering if we can meet to chat sometime. I'm looking to apply for grad schools and I'd love to talk to you about it. So even just doing it that way, right? Like reminding them about the course, what your participation was like. Hey, I wrote this great paper, or I wrote this paper I really liked for your course. I really liked that assignment you did. So just establishing that connection with a faculty member, and then asking if you can, meet up to chat on Zoom or in person, and building that relationship. That's a way to get a really nice, tailored letter, because that faculty member or professor can then reference those things when they're writing the letter. Also, usually, faculty, remember that professors have written so many letters of recommendation, and they're going to know what they need from you too, right? So if you're meeting to talk, they'll also, be like, okay, I need to know more about this thing that you're interested in, or this work experience that you have. So just take that opportunity to hang out and meet with professors, because they love it, really. Most of them are happy to help you if you establish the connection. So don't be shy, go for it.
Fantastic, Hannah. Thanks so much. There's lots of stuff going on in the chat. I wanted to say that the Writing Center has a whole bunch of workshops for getting your application to graduate school going and helping you figure out what to do with grant applications. So you should check the New College Writing Center website. Hannah did some wonderful work with Kyle's question. And I wanted to know if anybody else on the panel wanted to add to what Hannah said. We're looking at recommendation letters from undergrad profs. We're looking at creating relationships with supervisors, no matter where you meet them. And we have some interest in hearing a little bit about, for those of you who did write shirks, how did you begin? Who did you look to for support about shirks? As you are thinking, panel, about that, I see that Floria says they want to go to study at MSW program, don't have much experience in the field, been volunteering here and there. The volunteer work is really important. Often these applications for professional school, whether it's teaching or social work or something else, ask you to reflect on your experience. The more of that you can do, the better. Meanwhile, Lou has done some work in the chat. Check out what Lou has to say. And can any of the panel talk about creating relationships, either with undergrad profs or their supervisors?
I mean, I can go if no one else wants to add anything. I mean, I'll say this is also, I'm in the social sciences, so I think for this, for STEM disciplines, it's obviously a little bit different. But the way I did it was, again, I went into teaching right after my undergrad. And so I actually had meetings in my 4th year in undergrad with professors who were also, whose course I enjoyed, like Hannah said, but also whose research interests were specific to mine. And so, I had taken like a 4th year history course in slavery studies with a professor who offered me a lot for thinking about my ongoing work. And so maintaining those relationships, I think also, like, I maintained relationships with them for years, right? And so I said, I'm going to go to teaching, but can I reach out to you in like 1 or 2 years? And they, originally I was like, oh, that's a long time, but they all wrote me reference letters like 2 years later. And so I think if you maintain those relationships, if you like go to their office hours, if you tell them you're interested, a lot of times they don't know, like they don't know who's going to grad school, they don't know who's interested in what. And so, making that very specific and communicating that will be really important, I think, for maintaining these sorts of relationships. And as I said, like, I looked for the missing gaps in my own field, and I sort of found my supervisor through a course that they offered, right, where I sort of saw myself in the work that was being done. And so that's also how I think it's a lot of like, just you have to be a go-getter in terms of knowing the people that you really want to work with, knowing, telling them, I'm really fascinated by your research. I think you've offered me a lot, and just maintaining those relationships throughout time.
Beautiful. That's so great. Thanks so much. Thanks, Hannah, for telling us about Shirk. Thanks, Binta, for telling us about Shirk. Just before we go back to the panel, we have somebody who is studying architecture, and you're going to apply for the Master of Architecture. Right now, you don't have any work experience. Will not having work experience be a problem? I think to find out in your particular field what the answer to that question is you should probably talk to some of your profs. In general, my feeling is work experience can only make you more competitive, but you have an idea that you want to apply this January. For your particular field, I talked to the profs that you're working with right now in architecture to ask them about that. And we do have a wonderful link to science workshops. Thank you so much, Lou. Okay, Melissa, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I've just a question for those, I can't specifically remember the panelists that spoke about taking a few years off before pursuing their studies, like their postgraduate studies and whatnot. And my question is just like, when you were in the space of like working a regular job or whatever, I know Binta like touched on it, like she was inspired to go back because she wanted more diversity. But say if you don't necessarily know in that year off exactly where you want to go, like my thing is like when you got into your graduate study, did you feel like you were missing out by being in the workforce, or like do you feel like you continuing your studies and not necessarily going out to like start making an income? Do you think that's a challenge that you have? Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm articulating myself correctly. Like, it's sort of like a question I have that isn't properly formulated in my head yet. But I suppose like, do you miss out on like actually being on the field working a normal job or whatever, having gone back after your years off?
To me,
So I,
Melissa, it sounds like you're struggling with the pros and cons of working and going back to grad school,
Yeah.
and you're interested in knowing maybe a little bit more about the forces that came into play to help people make those decisions. Kate, I see your hand, but I'm going to let the panel answer Melissa, and then we'll go to you, Kate. Go ahead, Hannah.
I think I might start this with a provocation, actually, which is we have a tendency to think about academia and the real world as like a binary, like two very distinct things. So one thing I would encourage you first to think about is that in grad school, you are working often. You're employed in various forms, right? During your master's, you might be TAing. You might be a research assistant. Same with your PhD. You might be a TA, a research assistant, or teaching a course, like a course instructor. So I think we need to like also rethink a little bit how we separate these things as totally, discrete categories. There are many ways in which they cross over, and we can talk about our grad school as employment, as a job, as working. That being said, as someone who did work outside of academia between my undergrad and my master's and my PhD, I'm very grateful for those opportunities because I think you learn a lot about yourself in different work environments. I think it was Binta who said like the world is a very large place. Like there's so much to experience, and I think you only bring that with you to your graduate studies. So if your question is like, should I work or should I not? I don't think there's a wrong answer necessarily, but I would never say there's never anything wrong with being a mature student and having work experience under your belt. From my experience, those of us who are a bit older, perhaps, who have had, more experience working, just have a different focus, maybe different set of priorities, perhaps clearer sense of what we wanted to do. I had more time to sort of think about how grad school could further my career or support my ambitions. But I also wouldn't say that people who went right through have regrets about not working. So I think it's a really personal choice. So I hope that those like provocations maybe help you a little bit, but yeah, let the others go.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Bentag, you want to go next?
sorry, I was responding to a comment about wanting to work for the UN. So
Oh, nice.
as I said, so for me, it's a very hard balance because I knew that in the area that I wanted to work at within the United Nations, for example, you need your master's, right? There's some areas where you're competing for, like apparently 7,000 applications are sometimes submitted for one particular post within the UN. So you're competing with people that have much more experience than you, perhaps, that have much richer experience. So having your master's with a topic or with a degree that's kind of linked to it, because my degree was like gender globalization, something very like fancy. It sounded really good, sounded really put together for the United Nations, and I applied for UN Women in New York, and I got that role. But they could have looked at my CV and said, she worked at CIBC for 4 guys. I worked for CIBC for 4 years. I hated that job, but I needed that money to fund my master's, right? So everything happens in a particular way, but I had a specific goal of wanting to work for the UN. And I knew I would not get the job that I wanted, not in any UN headquarters, without a master's degree. Because even the internship program required a master's degree. Now, when I entered the UN, I moved from New York to Rome, then Rome to Bangladesh, working at that time, the largest refugee camp. That could have been enough, but I figured, if I am sitting here working as the head of gender in this Rohingya refugee camp, where could I go if I really went back to school and get a PhD in gender and climate change? Right? And then the opportunity arose where I was a U of T, had this amazing program, had this amazing supervisor who I felt I'll be able to work with in a way that will not make me hopefully regret leaving a position to come back. And when COVID happened, I was able to jump back and forth, actually working remotely for the World Food Program from Toronto, because I worked before there. So they were like, okay, we needed some gender analysis on these particular projects. So I felt like, it sounds easy to say, but I was confident that, listen, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go get my PhD, because then I'll seem more attractive to the UN, to the World Bank, to any of these organizations that I want to work in. So you just have to figure out what your particular goal is and where you want to be. It makes no sense to just have your undergrad and says, I'm going to compete, because you're going to waste your time. But also, it doesn't mean that you need to go to grad school, right? So take a look at the space that you want to be in and be realistic. Being realistic really, really saves time, right? And also combine realism and also just be idealistic as well. But the older you get, it gets expensive to live in an idealistic world. That's what I find. So what I say is, take your time. Education never comes to an end. I used to roll my eyes when people say that, but honestly, living it, I'm like, yeah, you could get too old to go to school, but not really, because I was fortunate enough when I came to Canada. I started university when I was 16. I finished when I was 19, and then I worked for 4 years to do my master's. Finished that when I was 25, and worked 4 years at 29 to come back to U of T. So I feel like this, I don't know if it's the millennial generation or generation after that, we tend to be in a rush to finish up something. And an education, for me, if you have opportunity to have an education, take it, but also take it in a way that it will not stress you out. I do not believe doing your PhD should be that stressful. Like, I am enjoying it so far. If I'm stressed, I call Ryan, I send him a WhatsApp. I'm like, I'm dying over here. But then it's not, so far, honestly, it's not a stressful journey, because I was lucky to choose the right supervisor and the right university with the right people. That's my advice.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. And I don't know if folks have seen Lou's comment in the chat, but Lou says something that layers what Binta said beautifully. It was every single experience is important, and that you should take what you can from every single experience. And if you go up, you'll see Lou's exact quote there. It's really great. Now, Kate has joined. Kate had their hand up, but you've done some really lovely work in the chat. Kate, do you want to layer anything you have in the chat, or does that do that for you?
Sure, yeah. The one thing I'll add in, thank you for this opportunity, but the one thing I'll add in is that the people calling me crazy are not the people in this. So I work in healthcare, and I want to do some specific work around advocacy and knowledge transfer and data and analytics within healthcare. And everyone that I work with in positions that are really inspiring to me and teams that I really want to be involved at have PhDs, and I only have an undergrad. So I know that the right step forward is to go back and get my master's and maybe one day do a PhD as well. There's lots of positions with the company I work at that have masters as well, but it's everyone else in my extended circle. And some professors have said, be careful, in my undergrad have said, be careful, work in school at the same time is really difficult. And I know it will be difficult, but specifically in healthcare, it's so ever changing, and we're at this precipice right now. And I feel that being a part of it, working while going to school, they're really going to live and breathe off each other. And I do have a lot of fears and a lot of worries of, oh no, am I taking on too much? But my work is very pro continuous education. And I know a lot of people that I work with are also doing school at the same time. So I feel like I have a good community of support, but I was just listening to all of you panelists speak about work in school has really clarified it for me. And I know that it will be a lot of work, but I'm excited.
Thank you, Kate, for that. That's exactly what I took away from what the panel said. And, you know, I've been in the academy for 30 years now. I don't know anybody who didn't work and study at the same time, right? That's what we do. And I loved what Hannah said about there isn't a binary, right? They feed each other. And Binta said the same thing. You keep on looking at, you know, who is doing what is it that they know, what might you do next. And you're right, all of our fields, but healthcare in particular, changing all the time. We are now at 4:08. It's been a fantastic conversation. The middle theme is really nuts and bolts about applications, but I've been directing everybody to the Writing Center. The New College Writing Center has a whole program on getting ready for writing grad applications. They have a program that allows you to meet one-on-one for a specific set of sessions to get some feedback on your grad applications. So those specifics are really well served by the Writing Center at New College. So please go and check that out. And what I'd like to do then with our last 20 minutes is go to the theme of tips for applying to graduate school. And was there one thing, I'm going to ask our panel, or several things that somebody told you, or something that you discovered while you were applying to grad school that you think you'd like to share, because that ended up making things a little easier, or really were key to your success? So panels, any tips as you get ready to go to graduate school? In some ways, we've had a couple of tips already. See if you can find the right supervisor. Go to conferences, listen to people talk about their work to see if you can find a good match. We heard about the importance of community, not only one supervisor, but the importance of community. We heard about think about your funding. We heard about think about getting funding ahead of time. Anything else that we can think of? Yes, Lou, go ahead.
I just want to second that, and also talk to your TAs, because your TAs are grad students, and they'll love to share their experience. And also don't be afraid to approach supervisors, especially at U of T, since you are at U of T already. So that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks. Lou, what should people say when they approach potential supervisors?
Right, so again, I'm in the science field. So first is that usually is that what I wanted to do, what kind of research I wanted to do, and why I'm interested in your research group, and what does your expertise can advance my study. And I think coming to a professor with a prepared mind will really demonstrate you're prepared. And supervisors would love to have people that are critical thinkers and know where to proceed.
Thank you so much for that, Lou. I don't know where people are at, if they're in year 3 or year 4, or they're finishing up soon, but U of T has a work-study program that allows folks to work on professors' research teams. And if you haven't been able to take advantage of that program, and I know there's lots of reasons why folks can't manage it, that is a really interesting way to meet different people and to see how a potential supervisor's work can help you. And going back to not getting too wrapped up about the binary between taking courses and working, not worried about rushing. It may be worth your while, if you're in year 3, to take things a little slower in year 4, if that allows you to do a work study gig that ends up pushing you forward. Okay, now we have Ryan and Hannah. Go ahead, Ryan.
I was just gonna add to Lou's point. One of the best things I think for me, just on a macro level, was like I actually met grad students before I came in, and actually like had like one-on-ones with like a lot of people. So like when I came into like the WGS program, I had already had a connection with a friend who was also working with my supervisor, and defended his dissertation with my supervisor, and then also was coming into the program. So I think also just like building connection and actually getting multiple perspectives and like making friendships or connections, whatever, with people who've already been through it can give you a lot of sort of perspective, even if like, that is like the right place for you, because like you said, Tara, like not every department is going to be the best place for you. And like, like when I was coming out of my music degree, one of my supervisors, he said to me, like, I have nothing left to offer you. And right. So just even hearing that, and he was like, you've done everything. And he was like, I don't think this PhD a PhD in the music department will be useful, because he's like, I don't like, you'd be running the show basically. And I really wanted to build my archive, not feel like my archive was already built. And so I think making like deep connections, like reaching out to grad students, even if you don't know them, and you just send them an email and be like, hey, I'm this person. I saw your information on the website and I really think your research is cool. Like, would you want to like meet on Zoom? Because even that way you're going to hear about other sort of profs and what they're doing, other like opportunities, other work gigs that you can get. And I think that was like the most helpful thing, because talking with profs is great, but also talking with grad students about the literal experience of being there, I think it was the most helpful, because you get a sort of firsthand of like, what is it like? What do the courses look like? What's the work like ethic like? What are the sort of courses you're going to take? What are the sort of opportunities? I think that was sort of the most important thing. And then obviously profs come in and fill all the other gaps that the profs do. But I think talking to people in the programs is one of the most helpful.
Beautiful, beautiful. Lou has something in the chat about finding a supervisor. Thanks so much for that. And Hannah, go ahead. You had something you wanted to add.
Yeah, I mean, I'm building off what Ryan said, I think, but like grad students and their supervisors are all just like big, excitable nerds, right? Like we all love what we're doing, hopefully to a degree. So if you like email a grad student, either in the department, like in the discipline that you're interested in your current institutions, like if you're, if you want to go into anthropology, even in, Australia, the UK, whatever, but you can always look in your current institution and talk to those grad students, because they probably either have experience applying, maybe some of them are from these other places. So like use that resource. We're all like, we get bad news a lot of the times in our inbox, or like not ideal news. So if we have someone who comes up and is like, hey, I want to talk to you about grad school, your research is interesting, usually we'll be happy to chat. Same with professors. I think in undergrad, it's typical to feel like your professors are like very far away from you and sort of difficult to communicate with or contact, but they're also excited about research and grad school. So just a tip, if you email a faculty member, a supervisor, someone you're interested in working with, and they don't get back to you right away, email them again. A lot of faculty have like hundreds of emails, right? If they're thinking about it, if they're teaching a course with like 200 students, they might be fielding a lot in their inbox. So don't be shy to send follow-up emails. You might feel like you're nagging or being annoying, but you're not. And this is something I didn't know early on, but it has been reminded and told to me so many times since that it's an important tip to remember, I think. And just to remind you that just by being in the room today, you're already taking like a really good step, right? Attending events like this, checking out the department you're interested in. One thing about the pandemic is things are accessible on Zoom like more often now. So see if the department you're interested in is having events that you can attend online virtually, connect that way. So you're doing it already. Just keep doing it.
Brilliant. Just as we begin to wrap up, we have two folks who had experiences as international students. And I'm wondering if Hazal and Binta have any tips for international students. The journey is very expensive. The journey is complicated, as Hazal was telling us, by work permits and all kinds of things. Any tips for international students? Hazal, maybe we'll start with you.
Yeah, I don't know about the MA programs, but for the PhD program, of course, if you're applying for a MA, PhD combined, it's all about the scholarship. And as an international student, you will have since I don't know if you are already an international student in Toronto for your BA and you are going to continue in Canada or to apply for a different country. Each country and each institution has their own procedures in terms of the international students. But my recommendation would be very similar to Ryan's and Hannah's, contacting with the international or current international graduate students of the department that you are interested in would be your best option to get the information you need. Because usually, for example, me coming to Canada, I also had a friend, international student from Turkey at WGSI. So although some information was available for me on the website, I got most of the information that I needed. Even the small amounts of scholarships, where can I go at the university to benefit from, some writing help. Those things are usually you'll get the information from students. So contacting international students and also the international community center at universities, international experience they are usually called, would be a good idea. And again, of course, once you're an international student in a country, will you be there with your study permit? Will you be able to work at the same time? Canada, just recently, last week, Ontario changed its rules about international students being able to work. Now they are going to, but until now, you were only allowed to work, for example, 20 hours per week, which wouldn't be able to support your studies financially. So you would need a scholarship, or you cannot go to so if your study permit in Toronto allows you to be only at UFT, you cannot take even a course from a vocational training center, for example. These rules are usually you have to follow through the, as I said, international experience offices of the universities or the international students. So it's shared knowledge usually.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Binta, anything you want to add to that, tips for international students?
Yeah, so I transitioned from international student for my undergrad, and then I was an international student in London, England.
Right.
But at University of Toronto, I was a resident of Canada then. So Canada, I feel like, unlike other countries, they do have a pathway, no matter how slow, to actually regularize your status, because the immigration, I think, is interested in capturing international students and letting them become permanent residents and Canadian citizens. So as an undergrad, as Hazel was saying, I came to the country. I didn't know anybody. I came in, and of course, apart from, I never really used the International Center when I was at Western, to be quite blunt, because we had the like the student clubs. Those, even though you're with students who probably you are with international students, you're with Canadians, so sometimes you tend to share information much quicker than going to a center, and it tend to be more real, in my opinion. Like that you could talk to someone and freak out and cry over your study permit not coming back, and maybe they might have a resource that will then tell you, okay, when this happened, this is what I did, right? Because my parents were far away in Gambia, so that help wasn't necessarily there right away. So student clubs, I found my network with student clubs. Then when I became a resident and eventually got my citizenship in Canada, by the time I applied for my PhD, it's already a funded program. I was able to compete for SHRC. And this all happened in the span of me switching from international student to postgraduate work permit worker to permanent resident, and then to becoming Canadian citizen. So in all of that, I found that, there's resources, but find people that will be able to tell your experience. And Hazel just said, when I first came to Canada, you couldn't even work that 20 hours. There was nothing like that when I came in 2005. So things do change. If you are interested in staying in Canada, you could definitely do so, because then I spent half my life in Canada. So I find that it could be a second home that you could embrace. And in that way, when you pursue other forms of education, you already paid your dues to the Canadian system. The average international student in the 4 years of learning will probably pay $75,000 to $100,000. So once you get your citizenship or your permanent residency, please do take advantage and get Canadian domestic tuition. That makes a huge difference, because then I was able to travel for work with that domestic tuition. I was able to actually pursue things that I wanted to do rather than work a job that I didn't want just to save money to cover international tuition. So there are resources. So find international students, and most of the time in Canada, I found that you'll find students that were international and then switch over to being domestic.
So helpful. I hadn't thought about student clubs. I too was thinking the way Hazal did about the international student centers, because those are the communities that, are there within institutions. But of course, student clubs, great place to find relationships. Okay, we have 7 minutes left. Any questions from our participants? We have a whole lot of beautiful tips, lots of things that have layered what we've already said. I know a lot of people are playing in the chat. Lou was able to talk about tips from a science perspective. The folks who are participating, anything else you want to know based on something you've heard? Everything is interesting, nothing is boring. As you are thinking, if we have no more questions, I'd like to ask for last words from our panel. What last words might you have for our undergrads? What kind of things do you think you'd like to leave them with? And maybe we'll begin with Ryan, if you don't mind, Ryan. Last words.
Yeah, I guess I would say, to a lot of the sort of anxieties around, whether to apply, whether not to apply, and to sort of echo the sort of class politics that Hannah was bringing forth, is that the university is not going anywhere, so it's always here if, you want to do the work that you want to do. But I would say, don't feel like I was super stressed out about, whether I should go into teaching first or whether I should come to the academy. And now I kind of do both, right? And so it always worked out in the end. But I would say, if there is that sort of anxiety, do what feels right for you in the moment of your life. Don't put yourself in multiple harm's ways, including financial, if it's not doable, because you can always come back and do work, right? You're always going to be sort of doing your work in whatever capacity you're going to do it. I think all of us sort of especially in WIGSci, all of us kind of started the academy. I love that. I forget who was Hazal or Ben just said we're mature students because I'm when you come into the program, most people are 24 and I was 28 when I started the PhD. and we're considered like the old people of the PhD students, which is not that old at all. But it's like, I mean, it goes to show that, you know, thinking takes a long time, right? And, you know, a lot of things I've heard from American professors, like assistant professors in the States, is that they wish they had more time to just like think, right? About their projects and like not rush their thought process and all that sort of stuff. And so I would say taking time to like figure out what you want to do and like where you want to be and what sort of academic genealogies and histories and traditions you want to be part of takes time. I wouldn't have gotten there, I think, if I had just like rushed through it. But I also understand money is important and those sorts of things too. So I would say just do what works best for you. And the other thing was just put yourself, you know, just go get whatever you need, right? I think the academy a lot of times asks us to sort of requires of us to be go-getters in a lot of different capacities. So go for the supervisors you want, make connections with the people you want, go out for, you know, research opportunities, teaching opportunities, they are there, you know? And so just do what is going to be best for your sort of trajectory and whatever trajectory you take. And like find the people that can help you to get there, right? There's no need to be sort of like shy or timid, because 99% of the time, you know, even though the academy is a very sort of hegemonic terrain, 99% of the time people want to see you succeed. So, you know, we're all sort of all in this on the same team to like, we all want to be successful. We all want to do the things that we want to do. So, yeah, just be a go-getter and just stand up for yourself and on all the different ways that you need to.
Beautiful, beautiful. Hannah, would you like to give some last words?
Sure. I echo like most everything that Ryan said. I would say also, you can't predict the future. You never know where you're going to end up, you know, like we can always have anxieties and like wrestle with, do I apply? Do I not apply? I mean, first of all, if you can afford it, just apply. At least then you can say no if you change your mind in, you know, a couple of months, or you might know better about what you want by the time the responses come back. So, you know, if you can get it together, apply and see what happens, because you never know. But again, like we just don't know where things are going to go. And I've been surprised multiple times at where I've landed and found myself. Another thing I would just remind you is like, it's different for everybody, but for me, I try not to think about grad school and higher education as something I'm trying to get through to get to something else. Like, this is what I do. I TA, I teach, I do research, you know, I have courses, like this is what I do. This is my job. I'm not trying to like get through it to get somewhere else. Like sometimes we joke, you know, those of us who are going into years 5, 6, 7, whatever, this is a lifestyle to a degree, right? So, you know, maybe that's where you're at. Don't think about grad school as something that you have to like get through to get to somewhere else. That's definitely the case for some people. But it can also just be what you're doing right now. And you can still have like a life outside of grad school and do fulfilling things along with grad school as well. So yeah, I mean, go for it. Just give it a try and see how you feel when you get your responses back. And as my mom always says, just move forward in the direction you mean to continue, and doors will open. So
Beautiful. Binta.
I will say last words is, please take the imposter syndrome, stab it, strangle it, and throw it away. Because I find that a lot of us carry this, it's as if we're watching ourselves in these spaces and make ourselves believe that we don't deserve to be in these spaces. And academia does have this sense that, this ivory tower sense of only a specific group of people deserve to be in it. It's true, but it's not based on because you're less than, it's because of the experience that you bring in. So my advice is, if you want to pursue a postgraduate degree, you owe it to yourself to apply, because you never know what's going to happen. Just apply and see where it will take you. And you could do so in a way of being like super single-minded, like what, you know, for my undergrad, I was like, for my master's, I'm sorry. And I said, I'm going to apply to this particular school, and if I don't get in, that's it, which is kind of unhealthy looking back. But at the same time, it was no pressure. If I didn't get it, I'll just figure where life takes me. And also I would say enjoy the journey as well, because it's a whole new experience, and not many people actually end up doing following academia till its very end, right? So if you are lucky to be part of it, please take the time to care for yourself, care for people around you, and just enjoy the experience, because I can't believe that I'm in my third year. Okay, yes, COVID did crush some of, I mean, I can't believe it's been 3 years, because like, it's just what it is. And you do meet incredible people. You do meet amazing people that you would not have met in the workplace. I could guarantee you that. So give it a shot and don't be afraid.
That's lovely. Okay, Hazal, what do you have to say as final words?
I mean, already Ryan, Hannah, and Binta said almost everything that I wanted to say. So I'll just be very brief. I agree with almost everything that is already said. Probably I'll just add this. I know that the application processes or like these decisions might be stressful, but really I agree with Binta, there's something to enjoy in it, because usually even this confusion will lead you to know something better about yourself or what you want in life. It is after this moment of maybe stress and anxiety, you'll be one more step closer to knowing what you really want. Maybe you'll choose the wrong thing first, and then seeing that's not really what you want, you'll lead to another path. So this is an important moment in your life to really get to know what you really want to do here in this world. And usually, like, grad school, these decisions are also, like, as we've already discussed, is also related to, your class position, where you're coming from, how you are politically aligned. So bringing all these elements and creating a path for yourself is not an easy task, but you are already here and you are really close. And if you're thinking of graduate school, I would just recommend that, like, really apply for it and try to enjoy the process of figuring out what you really want.
Beautiful. And Lou, we're going to leave the very last words to you. What would you like to say as last words?
Thank you very much for the honor. And so I just want to say is come in with a prepared mind and enjoy the most and get the most out of the PhD and move out as soon as possible, as fast as possible, and to the next chapter of your life. And a PhD or grad school in general is a big commitment, and only do it because you love doing it, and as such chose the program accordingly. And that's just my 2 cents.
Beautiful. Well, this has been an amazing, amazing session. I have enjoyed getting to know our senior doctoral fellows even better by hearing their stories. You are a group of stunningly exciting scholars and thoughtful scholars, and you've made time to be an extraordinary group of mentors for our undergrad students. Thank you so, so much for your time. Could we all unmute and just clap for our wonderful panel, because I think they deserve it. Okay, on 3. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you, panel, and we wish you all the best. I want folks to keep their eyes on New College announcements. All of our senior doctoral fellows will be presenting on their research in April. You will have a chance to hear these absolutely wonderful people talk about their exciting work, and you'll be able to see what comes out of all of the work that they've put into their graduate school. So thanks so much for everything, and have a great week. Good luck.
Thank you.
Soon.
Bye. Thank you.